Hope and Patience with Amelia Rope, a podcast about business, well-being and chocolate.
A huge hello to my lovely listeners. This is our first recording during COVID-19. It's a bit odd because I'm used to seeing my guests, which I really love to do, but my guest is staying safe, as we all are. Chris, our producer, is tuning in, so there will be no misbehaving or going too much off-piste. How are you all doing at this strange time? It's very odd. I've certainly had some ups and downs, and I'm sure you've all been challenged too. But I hope and pray for all of you who've got your own businesses that you're managing to find a way through, that you will be able to come through the other side of this. It's challenging and it's testing us all. And I keep reminding myself, what am I learning about it? Thank heavens for Captain Tom. And my heart goes out to all the frontline workers, carers, and to anybody who's lost loved ones from the pandemic. I'd love to do a shout out for my cousins, Hope's granddaughter, Tamsin, who is a frontline worker at Northwick Park Hospital, and Nicola, who's Patience's eldest granddaughter, who is head of a school and getting her head around online teaching and also going in every day to look after key workers' children. So it is time to get on with our show, and our guest today is a dynamic guy with incredible resilience. His previous chapters include life in the high-pressure corporate world for, I think, around 12 years, surviving a stroke aged 30, and emerging into the world of well-being in 2012. It's time to say a massive hello and thank you to our guest, Niraj Shah. He is co-founder of Mind Unlocked, a business whose mission is to create evidence-based, practical mental well-being tools more accessible. And to quote Niraj, no crystals, no mumbo jumbo. He is also the European co-chair for the Transformative Tech Lab in Silicon Valley, which is the leading global community of entrepreneurs using technology to raise mental health and emotional well-being. So huge hello again and welcome.
Hi, Amelia. Really good to be here.
It's lovely to have you. I wish we could see you, but another time.
It will have to be another time, and those times will come.
They will come. Of course, they will come again. I would love you to share with the listeners a whistle-stop tour of how you morphed from the corporate world and into sort of setting up your own gigs, because I don't think this is your first business. And probably after these times, many of the listeners will potentially be changing from the corporate world into setting up their own business for their next chapter.
Yeah, sure. I'll give you the whistle-stop tour, and then we can delve into some of the entrepreneurial stuff. And you're right, it's not my first rodeo. So the starting point is that I was just a normal guy with a normal life, that fast-paced, work hard, play hard, sleep later attitude. I was based in London with my corporate job, and then I started doing some work in Hong Kong for the company I was working with, eventually moved to Hong Kong. And in my late 20s, I developed a sort of semi-committed interest in health. And that was really driven by the fact that I couldn't get away with the things that I was getting away with before. So I remember looking down one day at sitting at my desk and thinking, where did that spare tire come from? It was a revelatory moment. It was like, I have no idea how this happened, but it's happened. So I started drinking less. I started going to the gym a bit more. I had this semi-committed relationship with health. And that passing interest became an obsession with learning about brain function, well-being, and vitality when, as you have touched on, at the age of 30, out of nowhere, I had a sudden and serious stroke. So a very severe brain injury, and it was scary. I temporarily lost the use of my legs. We didn't know what the brain damage was going to be like. I had energy like a broken battery. It was a interesting time, a very uncertain time. And luckily, I had great care at the NHS. So I've been a massive fan of the NHS ever since, because they were just unbelievable. And I had this amazing neurologist who basically, there's a few key things that he did. The first thing is that he told me that after they discharged me, he said, I'm really confident that you're going to make a nearly full recovery. And I think it's so important when a medical professional says that to you, because that gave me confidence that I could make the recovery. And then secondly, he said, you need to sleep every afternoon until you feel back to normal, which was just over 10
Mm.
years ago that this happened. But in the last 2 or 3 years, we've started learning just how important sleep is. So he was ahead of his time. And he also said, you need to do yoga now. I don't want you lifting heavy weights until you're fully recovered. I want you to only do yoga. So I started doing yoga. So that was, I got discharged. I had a partial ability to walk. I could only sleep, eat, and do yoga. So yoga became a fixture in my life. We didn't find a cause. We don't know why this happened. It wasn't genetic. It wasn't another health issue. And statistically, the chance of reoccurrence in that first year is so high. So my attitude was, I'm scared and I need to make sure this has the smallest chance of happening again. So the hence starting to devour information about well-being. And I also started like really devouring business books, because when this had happened, I had already decided to leave the corporate world. I had already started making moves to figure out what that first business was going to be. So I used this time to level up my knowledge. So then 6 months later, I'd had the physical recovery and feeling very, very grateful. And I thought, okay, it's time to start a business. So I started working for a startup to get some experience whilst working on my own ideas on health and technology on the side. And basically, that turned into 18 months of learning loads and getting nowhere, which I'm sure many entrepreneurs are
Yeah, I think
really
we can
familiar
relate
with.
to that.
Yeah, so basically at this point I got really desperate. I had to make something work. My ideas in health and technology were going nowhere. So I sort of out of pragmatism, I decided to look at the real estate sector, got some advice around that, and said, okay, I'm not that interested in property, but I know it's a sensible place to go. I know it's very inefficient. There's lots of things to do, so I'm just going to commit to this for 12 months. And this is important. It was a combination of desperation and
Hmm.
commitment. I'm not going to get distracted by anything else. And I just figured, I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I thought my worst case scenario is I'm sure I can buy a property and do it up and sell it and make some money that way. And basically that was my starting point. So that first year was good enough to do a year two, and that was the first business in 2012 that I started. So failed to get anything going in health and tech, turned to property, and that went well enough that I'm now in year 8 of that. That business is now 8 years old, and basically from there, through a lot of hard work and on the side of this, I'm doing all the well-being stuff. I'm into yoga. Yoga had led to meditation, which is a big fixture in my life. I'm eating well, I'm exercising, I'm sleeping. And from property, I started a property technology company. So that was my second one with a group of other people. And that started going well. But I knew that I'd come to this sector without the interest in a sector, and more an interest in working with great people and doing great things. So I decided, okay, rather than scale my interests here, let me take a step back. I'm in my mid 30s now. This is 5 years ago. And I thought, okay, I really want to do something in well-being. This is my identity now. And also I figured that the economics on this look quite good, because we're living longer, but we're getting sicker younger. So there's lots of problems to be solved in the well-being space. For the next couple of years, I started mentoring some well-being entrepreneurs and, sort of helping them with their businesses, sharing the things that I'd learned, whilst also winding down some of my property stuff and putting some of it under management structure so that I didn't have to be as involved. And basically where that all led to was a couple of years ago, I started a meditation project. I didn't know if I wanted to make it a business. At the same time, I got involved with the guys in Silicon Valley because I'm really interested in technology, and tech has been a big part of my life. And I guess my primary interest is in the evolving relationship between rapidly advancing technology and our 40,000-year-old human brains. So I started Mind Unlocked as a bit of a movement 2 years ago as a side project. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do something in the space or not, but I could see something that needed solving. That side project snowballed. We were doing in-person meditation events that led to things in sleep and digital balance. So we started looking at well-being as a whole. And we started, my whole ethos was I want to take this very research-led, very practical approach, because there's so many great well-being things out there, but they're not reaching people who are slightly skeptical, who are pragmatic, who are leading busy lives. They don't want to go to the yoga studio, they don't want to go to the Buddhist center, but they do want to solve their problems around stress, insomnia, anxiety, that kind of thing.
When you first got into the wellbeing side, were there many men involved in it, or was it mainly female led?
It was mainly female led, and it still is mainly female led. And it's actually wonderful to be in a sector which is very heavily dominated by females because that's not normal. But because of that, you get a different dynamic, you get a different way of thinking. But to make these things work, you need both. You need all of it.
Yeah.
You can't just be one or the other.
I mean, would you say that if you look back at your life, that all the sort of threads, unusual threads, and some obviously extremely unpleasant and scary, that they've all been drawn together into what you're doing now and where you're at?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, when we look backwards, we can connect the dots in a very linear way. But what I'm not telling you about is all the things that I did that didn't work and all the things that I
Yeah.
tried that were failures. All my activities and learning converges around the intersection of well-being, technology, and entrepreneurship. And even before I started my first business, like all of those things have been big fixtures in my life. Well-being, obviously, because of the stroke and it's how it catalyzed
Yeah.
my interest. But technology, I've grown up around technology. I was playing around with computers when I was a kid. And on the entrepreneurship side, whilst I started my first business eight and a bit years ago, I've been investing in stuff for 20 odd years. So I always, and I work for very entrepreneurial companies. So I wanted to go down that route anyway. It was just a matter of finding the right thing at the right time. And also
So
like
changing
all
the sort
the
of vehicle.
yeah, and also all the things that I know now about how we lie to ourselves and how we BS ourselves about, an element of that is also just not knowing what to do. If I'd known what I know now, I would have started when I was 23 or 24 instead of when I was 30. Yeah,
But isn't that like us all? If I could rewind, I would have. It's not that I wouldn't have picked what I've done, but I would have done it in a very different way.
of course.
But I think hindsight is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, that's the voice of experience.
It is. So, do you think that with COVID-19, you will need to change your business as a result of it? I mean, it seems that a lot of it is driven online anyway, but I know that you do your public speaking, you hold big sort of meditation groups and yoga groups and that side of things. Will you need to adapt? Will you need to change?
I think at a fundamental level, we don't. But of course, we're looking at a different set of circumstances. So to give you a couple of examples, the vast majority of what we do is driven online anyway. But I like the in-person stuff because the in-person stuff, from a business model perspective, it's never going to be as lucrative, but it's just fun. And I think it's really important to do some things that are just fun and fulfilling, and it's a great way to connect with people. And to be honest, when Wanderlust and the Mayor of London asked me to lead a mass meditation for 1,000 people on Tower Bridge, you don't say no to things like that.
It's incredible.
So yeah, so that those are life experiences.
Yeah. So now I want to explore your mindset a bit, sort of things that make you tick and get under the bonnet, really, of
Sure.
Niraj. So I have been thinking recently, I mean, that's one thing with this time is that there is a lot of thinking time. I find the days go, I don't know about you, so quickly, and yet one is parked up in the same place. It's not even as if you're running around from meeting to meeting. But I was thinking about limiting beliefs and how I had limiting beliefs sort of in my childhood, then teens, and then 20s and 30s, and how they potentially blocked me but didn't, because they made me learn a lot more. Were you influenced in any limiting beliefs that sort of stemmed possibly from your childhood or your teens? And if so, did they ultimately transform to expansion? How did you overcome them? Did they slow your journey to where you are now?
Yeah, of course, I had limiting beliefs, and of course, I still do, and I'm constantly trying to become aware of them so that I can question those beliefs. So I think the biggest one that held me back was I knew from the age of 16 I wanted to start a business, but there's two probably. The first is I need to go and get some proper experience under my belt before I start, which is actually quite sensible. I think it's a really good idea for people to go and get 2 or 3 years of work experience in the real world, working for somebody else before you do your own thing. But that took me to my late 20s because of the fear of thinking I'm not ready, I'm not ready, I'm not ready. And the truth is that the reality is you'll never be fully ready. and there's never going to be a perfect time. So I think
Absolutely.
changing those helped. And then the other one, which really held me back from an entrepreneurial point of view, was this common media-driven narrative that you need to have a great idea, and then once you've got that great idea, that then things happen. And what I've learned in hindsight is that you don't need a great idea. What you need to do is go and find a problem that you really care about and find a way to solve it in a simple way and just get started. And that's a very different way of looking at things. But that the reason I got nowhere with those initial 18 months of attempts was because I was focused on what's the idea, what's the idea, what's the idea, and also trying to figure out what the end game looks like. And it's a little bit like saying, I'm going to drive from London to Scotland, but before I drive, I'm going to wait till every light goes green, and then I've got a clear path. When
Really
actually,
good
what you need to
analogy.
do, it's a perfect analogy. What you need to do is drive to the first stoplight, do that bit, and then once you do that, you'll figure out the next bit.
Very true.
I'll tell you a little secret as well.
Oh, goody. Like we all like little secrets.
We're still doing that at Mind Unlocked. What we'll be doing in 2 or 3 years in terms of the solutions will be different to what we're doing now, but the fundamental problem we're going to be solving is still going to be around helping people with stress, anxiety, insomnia, mindset, because no matter what happens, those things are not going to change. People are always going to want to sleep better, feel better, think better.
Wise words, most definitely. It is that thing of problem solving. And I think when I set up my chocolate business, I suppose I had the idea, but I hadn't even got my head around thinking about solving a problem and that side of things. It's interesting how you can find yourself falling into situations and then you sort of run with them.
I don't think the media helps. I don't think Dragon's Den helps. I don't think people who aren't in business who want to give opinions about business, it's not helpful, because until you've done it, you can't know, even though you think you're being helpful.
You really don't know. I mean, when I used to say I have a chocolate business, they used to have that sort of fantasy bubble. I think they thought Juliette Binoche in a little chocolate shop and playing around.
I thought Willy Wonka when I was like, can I come to your factory? That was the whole reason I talked to you in the first place.
Yes, we haven't said how we connected, but it was chocolate. It's really tough. And I mean, I see it as a wetsuit. And funny enough, I feel more at home in the wetsuit I'm wearing as a podcaster than I did in the chocolate world. But back to your point, is that unless you do it, unless you've done it, you really don't have any idea. It's a totally different world, but it's something that it's like when you said when you were 16 and you knew you wanted your own thing. It's a bit like me. I always knew I wanted to do my own thing, and it was just in my bloodstream. It wasn't necessarily that I was independent. It was just something that I had to do. I don't know if that was the same with you, Niraj.
Mine was a bit simpler, I think. I don't come from money. I don't come from an entrepreneurial family, but I am Indian by blood, and Indians are entrepreneurs. If you go to India, everyone's an entrepreneur because there's no social security and there's not that many corporate jobs. So if you want to eat, you better damn well figure out how to make money. So I come from a very entrepreneurial background, but in terms of my genetics and DNA, but not in terms of my family. And at the age of 16, it was really simple for me. I knew two things. I want to go and see the world, and I want to make a lot of money. That was the extent of my thinking, like just being really honest about it.
Well, it's lucky you got to see. I mean, it's lucky that all of us have got to see some of the world before the situation we're in now. I appreciate every plane flight I've been on and every country that I've put my foot into.
And this is the thing, right?
I
didn't get to travel until I was 18 or 19 because we didn't have money for those kind of things. I didn't grow up poor. I'm painting probably a picture like that, but we didn't have a lot of money for those kind of luxuries. So because of that, every plane trip is such a privilege for me. I'm so excited that I even get to do this. And part of that is the fact that I get to walk and I get to think, because those things almost got taken away from me. So it's easy for me to feel very grateful. Like, travel is a privilege because most of the world doesn't get to do it.
Mm-hmm. But on that thing of travelling, it was certainly as children, we went to Cornwall every year. That was it. And it was, I mean, in those days, you couldn't afford to go abroad. That was what it was called.
Yeah, you needed money to do it. Yeah.
Anyway, okay, so we're going to move on to another sort of topic that again has been spinning around in my mind, which is the word resilience. In life, one needs resilience, really. And I was sort of exploring it, and I was listening to a bit of Sheryl Sandberg, and she was comparing resilience, referring to it as a muscle, which I thought was interesting. And then some psychologists were talking about it as a quality, and others were saying perhaps it's in our DNA. As I've talked about on the show before, I've had to harvest and glean and draw off resilience. The lockdown has shown me that I do have a tank of resilience, but I also have another tank that needs more resilience. How do you perceive resilience? What does it mean for you and why?
Such a good question. So I guess resilience, I don't know. It's important. It's clearly important. I think there's things that have happened in my life that have really developed that resilience. So is it a muscle you can develop? Is it genetic? I think it's actually all of those things from all of the research that we've looked at in terms of brain function and so on. But what's clear is you can definitely train it. So you can definitely start with low resilience and move to a place of high resilience. There's a quality of our brains called neuroplasticity, where we now know our adult human brains do not stop physically developing when we're fully formed adults. So we're not going to get taller, our limbs aren't going to grow, but our brain can grow and it can change. And the way that it grows and changes is based on how we use it. The brain, the way it works, if we do something over and over again, it starts assuming that it's really important to our survival and starts getting efficient at that process. It also works for negative traits. So if we keep practicing worry, then we can start accessing worry much more easily. And we all know people who can access their state of worry very, very easily. And so it is for resilience. So basically, the best resource I know on habit formation is Atomic Habits by James Clear. Amazing audiobook, amazing website, amazing book. What he talks about when it comes to habit formation for resilience or anything, any habit that you want, you've got to start small, and you've got to get into the habit of doing the thing in a small way. And there's all sorts of things in the book. It goes into a lot of depth.
How do you bolster your resilience?
So yeah, this is where the thing we didn't talk about before the stroke, the other big trauma in my life is when I was 14, my father suddenly passed away from a heart attack. And that was, I think there's a few different ways that you can go when something like that happens. And I was very lucky because, like I say, we didn't have a lot of money, but we had a lot of love. We had a lot of values, we had a lot of integrity in the family. So my mother is amazing, and basically she's a rock, and I look to her example. But I also knew at the age of 14 I needed to step up and I needed to grow up, and obviously something like that has a profound effect on your life. So I think that was my first real resilience training, like first real training against hardship. It is helpful to have support around you when you can do that. I've been devouring those kind of books for a long time, and from them you gain ideas. If anything, you start feeling like anything's possible. And I think that...
And isn't that, that gives so much power and liberation. It's just thinking, you know what, I can do this. It is possible. It might be really tough and I might be stretched to my utmost, but I can do it if I really, really want to do it and I really put my heart and soul into it. Tying back to the name of the podcast of Hope and Patience, but having huge amounts of hope, but dollop loads of patience. I mean, they're sort of two scales. It's a bit, I like astrology, so I see it as Libra and the scales. But it's that sort of thing, isn't it?
Totally. So two things that every entrepreneur needs. We need to be optimists. We need to believe we can make a change in the world. And we need to have a lot of patience, because everything takes so much longer and costs so much more than you can ever imagine.
But also the same with the business, from my experience, is that you think, X will take you to Y, and then all of a sudden X is gone. And yeah.
Yeah, I think we underestimate what we can do in a year, we overestimate what we can do in a year, and we underestimate what we can get done in 5, because snowball effects play a big part.
Massive. What is your biggest distraction? So what is something that I think I know your answer, but I'm not going to say it. What is your biggest distraction? Maybe I don't, actually.
You think you know my answer? I want to know your
yeah, well,
answer.
I do, but not necessarily. It might not be your biggest distraction throughout the year. It might be part of the year.
I
but
don't
we
think
can
that's
discuss
a distraction.
that later. Okay.
I see it as learning and regeneration. So I am naturally ultra distracted. Like I am the most distracted person. So I've had to actually learn and implement a whole load of things that keep me not distracted. And I'm a productivity junkie, and I'm also very in tune with technology and how technology manipulates us. So I'd say actually modern tech is my biggest distraction, the thing that gets in the way
Hmm.
of me getting work done, and that basically means what's happening on my laptop and what's happening in my phone. But I've gotten very, very good at minimizing that, so I think that's gone.
So with your phone, how do you train yourself to be disciplined with your distractions?
I've written extensively about this digital balance. How do we get everything we need from technology without
Mm.
without basically becoming slaves to it? So it's quite a deep topic, but the basics are, first of all, understanding that there is a manipulation going on, and
Hmm.
understanding, becoming aware of what our habits actually are. I can give you a link to, stuff that I've written in this space so that people can follow up on this,
Wonderful.
because it's a massive topic, and it's the topic that I'm obsessed with, the relationship between technology and the human brain.
That would be wonderful. So before we head into our chocolate break, just a couple more questions that I want to sneak in. The inner critic, I know it's sort of been over-egged in a way, but it still fascinates me, this sort of critical self chatter that can go on in our heads. You might not have that, you might be sorted out on it, but if you do, how do you keep it at bay?
You're right. I don't have much of an inner critic. I definitely have voices in my head. Um, I think I, what's the best way to answer this? Because this is a tough one for me to talk about, because I don't really have that experience. I think I've always backed myself, and I wouldn't say always been confident, because that's not the right description. I've always trusted myself to figure things out and
Hmm.
get on with figuring them out, rather than criticizing myself for mistakes, because I make a lot of mistakes, but I get over them very quickly and I move on.
Okay, so we are going to dive into the chocolate break before we tap Niraj on his well-being and a couple of other things. He's got his own chocolate supply, obviously, because we're in different locations. So the thing that he can produce to eat is actually the same as Rowan Blacker, the first guest, Terry's orange. He's got mini Easter eggs that he tells me he's got by the side of his recording kit. I have upgraded and pulled out of my little store cupboard for my treat, because I don't have Terry's orange mini Easter eggs at this stage. It's the Chocolate Society. Al is the guy behind it, and it's dark coffee bean. So I'm going to tuck into mine, and Niraj will hopefully tuck into an egg.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's tough times. Beggars can't be choosers. I got what I could get. But
No, that's
when it
fine.
comes
I'm tucking in.
when it
Eat
comes to
away.
chocolate, there's two things. I love it when it's great chocolate, like the kind of stuff that you used to make. Your espresso bar was
Yeah, coffee.
divine.
That's right. You like my coffee
Or
one.
yeah, or I like really crappy chocolate, like
Same with
whole
me.
nut and M&Ms, and I'm kind of, it's got to be one end or the other.
Same with me. It's like sort of, if you, I don't know if you drink, but it's the sort of equivalent of having champagne but chips and mayo. It's that sort of combination. But I have to disclose that I do have a cream egg that's holding up in my fridge, and I'm savouring it for the right moment. So anyway, I'm tucking into my chocolate, tuck into an Easter egg, and I will then carry on as I'm eating, ask you a couple of questions. So the two words that I chat about on the show are success and failure. And success, I'm always intrigued by. I had a very traditional view of it, which was cash and power. And now I'm changing my view, but relatively in the past sort of few years, to it being much more subtle, and maybe it being more emotional and spiritual and that sort of side of things. How do you measure success, Niraj? He's gone.
Yeah, no, I'm here.
I
I'm
thought
here.
you'd gone to get your eggs.
Yeah, gone. Gone,
God,
never to come
he's
back.
gone.
So how do I measure success? It's such a good question, because I think the media-driven Western definition is not the one that's going to make anyone happy, and I think there's this perception, because we're fed all these, like, quite frankly, lies about how we need to be successful, and how we need to have a six pack, and how we need to have money in the bank, and how we need to have a successful relationship, and have a
Hmm.
perfect two kids, and holidays that are Instagram worthy. And actually, none of that stuff, what I've learned is none of that stuff matters. I think what's important is there's a few different things I think about. Number one is, if somebody can do what they want to do when they want to do it, then that's success, and that's different things to different people. So I think the fundamental is actually getting to do a bit of self-inquiry so you can figure out what's important to you rather than what's keeping up with the Joneses. And once you've figured that out, that's a big way towards the equation, because not everybody wants to run a business and not everybody wants to be a billionaire with a six-pack and all that kind of rubbish. So I think the first thing is getting clear on what's important to you. And I think the second thing is understanding that fulfillment is very different to external accolades. And I think what
Absolutely.
fulfills us internally is much more important. So one of the things for me being in a well-being space is I want to have an impact and I want to have a lasting positive effect on people's lives, because I know my time here is short, and that's just kind of what I want to do. But also I want to make good money doing it. So I think it's important to understand that money does play a part in it, but it's not the way that most people think about it. I think what's important is to be able to find a way to make enough money so that you can pay your bills and live the way you want to live. But the way I want to live could be very different to the way somebody else wants to live. I think somebody can be very successful if they decide they want to live in a countryside on a low cost base, or live in a different country and have this beautiful nature and have these amazing experiences. And you can have an incredibly successful life if that's what's going to fulfill you. So I think it's very personal. But I keep using this word fulfillment. It's different to happiness. It's different to external ideas about success, power, wealth, all of those things. Because everything I've read in a space and learnt in a space is that at the end of the day, you've got to go to bed feeling some sense of fulfillment with the direction you're going in, or who you're becoming. And ultimately that's why we have all these stories of all these ultra externally successful people with fame, money and the rest of it. And yet they kill themselves, or they're drug addicts, or they're... Jim Carrey said it best when he said, I want everybody to get rich and famous so that they understand that this is not the answer.
Very true. Okay, and quickly on to failure.
Yeah.
What does that word mean to you?
Failure is an interesting one. I think failure happens when you give up. When you give up on a dream, or you decide, and sometimes it's the right thing to give up. Like it might be that there's no point in banging your head against a brick wall for a long time and getting nowhere with it. So for example, for me, I had to put my health and technology ideas to one place and go and do something else in the property space. But I didn't see that as a failure. I just figured that I still need to learn and I still need to do things. And I think failure is an interesting one. It's such a loaded word.
I hate those words, giving up, as well.
What is a real failure? I mean, how permanent
Yeah.
is failure? Like, one of the interesting things is if you look at entrepreneurs who go bankrupt, a lot of them tend to be quite successful after that, because you realize that the thing that you thought was the worst thing that can possibly happen to you is actually, it's horrible,
A blessing.
but you're not dead. You're not going to have no money. You're not going to, so it takes away the fear. And I think I had a similar thing with a stroke, where I realized if I can deal with that, other things are not scary anymore. So this concept of failure is not one that I really think about. I do lots of things that don't work, but it's only a failure if I don't learn from it and don't do something differently as a result. Maybe that's a good way of putting it.
Okay, moving on to your well-being. I mean, you're pretty sorted, but I'm still going to tap you. How or where does stress affect you?
Do you mean in terms of like what stresses me out?
Yeah, and how you cope with it.
I think my threshold to feel stress is very, very high because of what's happened to me in my life. But I mean, there have been a couple of things that did really stress me out. There was a point about maybe 4 to 5 years ago where, for about a 48-hour period, I thought we might lose our home, the place that we live in, and might lose all the equity in it and all sorts of stuff. And that was incredibly stressful. And I think that stress goes away when you know that you can pay the bills for the next 2 or 3 months at least. And when it
Yeah.
becomes like 6 months, then, financial stress is a big part of it.
Yeah, huge, isn't it?
Yeah, huge part of it. So I think for me personally, like when that was going on, that got me very, very, very stressed. I think the beauty of being on my third business is that there's very little in the business that stresses me out, but that's a much easier thing to say when we've got cash in the bank. So I'm kind of aware of that. So other than that, I think I used to worry a lot about what people think about me. That kind of thing used to like really stress me out. And then I had a stroke and I stopped really giving a damn what anyone thought, because I realized that actually just gotta go and live life. And as long as I'm being kind and not on purpose trying to be an idiot to people, then I'm okay with that. And what other people think is none of my business. So there was things like that used to, I really had a deep-seated need to want to be liked, but that's all gone away now.
I think we all do, though, don't we? I mean, I certainly had that.
I
I think
I
age
don't have
also
that anymore.
No,
I
I
don't
don't
have that
have that
anymore.
anymore, but I did as a
Yeah.
child. I think it's part of
Yeah.
the growing
Yeah.
up thing, isn't it?
Well, it's
Okay.
part of our human psyche. We need to be accepted by the crowd because it's part
Yeah,
of survival instinct. Because if we're not accepted by the group, then in you only have to go back 200-300 years. That means you're probably going to die. That's where it comes from.
it is. Okay. Do you have a daily ritual as part of your well-being?
Yeah, I have a couple. I think the way I spend my mornings is quite consistent. So what I used to do, because pre-COVID, the
Mm-hmm.
pre-COVID era, I used to travel quite a lot. So I wasn't quite sure what my situation was going to be. So my ritual in the morning was quite simple. Then it was basically I need to get some hydration, I
Mm-hmm.
need to get some movement, and I need to do something for my mind, which would typically be like a short meditation or a bit of reflection or a bit of reading or whatever I felt like. It was simple because it's super adaptable to everything else. Since the 6 weeks that I've been home after escaping the USA and getting back, actually,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm in one place, I've got a more structured ritual. So I don't have a set time that I get up. I've got the luxury of that. I don't set meetings until the afternoons for that reason. But so I just get up naturally. But the first things I do is I get the hydration. I go and get 30 minutes of daylight outside because it's so important for circadian
Mm-hmm.
rhythm. I get some movement, whether that's walk, jog, yoga, whatever. Depends how I feel. Doesn't really matter what it is. What matters is that it happens. I do a little bit of reading, and then I do something. Then actually, what I do now, I do some work first. So I get some deep work done for about an hour, along with morning coffee, and then that's when I'll typically do something for my mind, have a bit of a break and do some meditation or something along those kind of lines. So I think the way I start my days is important because that sets a tone for the rest of the day. And then the other ritual I've got, which I've gotten really good at, is that I have cut off times for work. So I have a set time that I decide
Mm-hmm.
typically around sort of 6:30 p.m. most days, and work's finished, and now I'm going to do other stuff, whether that's spending time with my wife or doing something that isn't work or exercising, whatever it is. And then the other really important one, going back to something else we're talking about, I have a cut-off time for technology. So there comes a time where all my tech goes off, and so that I'm not on screen, so that I'm not screwing up my sleep on that. And
Mm-hmm.
that's about it. Everything else in there is relatively fluid.
So basically, your phone would be off at night rather than on, I'm imagining.
No, it's on. It's on, but
Is
it's
it?
in. But let me explain what I mean by that. It has a automatic night mode timer. So around 8 p.m., because the sun sets around 8, the phone screen fades.
Mm-hmm.
Um, at the same time, it goes onto a privacy mode where only like my nearest and dearest can get through to me. So it
Okay.
almost becomes like a landline, right? So
Yeah.
it becomes like a landline. So I can leave the ringer on, knowing that only they're going to call in an emergency. And then basically, I don't look at it between about 9 p.m. and about 30 minutes after I've woken up. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason for that is because I wear blue blockers. So these are the funny red glasses that biohackers wear. But what these do is they start mimicking nighttime conditions, because of course we're blasting ourselves with our artificial lights and all this kind of stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
between those two things, it means I can't really see my phone screen very well. And when you can't see it very well, then you don't want to do anything on it. So
No.
and then typically the first thing I'll do on my phone, which is about half an hour after I've woken up and done some of those other things, is that I'll fire up Instagram and I'll post my morning thoughts, and that's typically the first thing I'll do.
Yeah, same here, same here. Um, what are your hobbies?
Um, so in normal times, snowboarding, massive
Mm,
hobby. Part of the rationale to build a remote business where I can work from anywhere, because that's what we're doing, is so that I can spend my time on mountains and traveling and all of that. And it doesn't mean I'm not working. It just means that my work day is structured differently. When I'm snowboarding, I'm still knocking out somewhere between 3 and 6 hours of work, depending on what needs to be done, which is when you're focused, that's pretty good. So
mm-hmm.
that's my winter hobby. And then other than that, I've actually got into cocktail making, which has got nothing to do with anything that I'm doing, but it's creative, the history's interesting.
Fab result.
Yeah.
And you shared the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, but do you have a song that you really love that makes you feel upbeat or inspire you that you would share with listeners?
I don't. I don't have a particular song. My influences are rock and heavy metal. I grew up in the 80s. So when I'm working, I will either be listening to an app called Brain FM, which is basically functional music for mental states, fascinating stuff, or I'll be basically blasting Metallica songs on repeat. And the song on repeat thing is really good from a cognitive perspective because it can help us get into a place of focus because we don't get distracted by the song. It's just a loop that goes on, and then it starts becoming an anchor of okay, when I'm a little bit angry and I really need to get stuff done, this is a soundtrack for it.
I remember when I worked briefly in a Montessori school years ago.
Did they blast
we were
Metallica
talking,
as well?
yeah, they did. No, we were talking about playing Mozart for concentration. Have you heard about that? The Mozart
Yes.
technique.
Yes, I have heard
What's
about
your
that.
thoughts on that?
I think it has some credence to it. That there's so much to this in terms of how music affects our moods and mental states, but both music and also taste as well, which you would know very well from your days in the chocolate world.
Okay, so finally, I would like to ask you, because bearing in mind the podcast is called Hope and Patience, a time when you've had to have bucket loads of hope, and also what springs to mind when you think of your business, or it could be something else, where you've had to need a lot of patience.
Great questions. So hope, I'd say there's been three times. When my father passed away, you've got to be able to hope that things can get better when something that's happened. After I had the stroke, I had to really hope that have faith. I say it's different. Rather than hope at that point, it was faith. It was I will get better because there's no other choice. And of course, at that point, I had no idea if I was going to get better or not. It was just blind faith. And then the third one is, when you start a business, you've got to be an optimist. You've got to plan for the worst, but expect the best. So you've got to have a lot of hope to do that. And I think I have a lot of hope that the work that we're doing now can really help a lot of people. On the patience one, I think it goes hand in hand with the business side of things. I think everything takes longer and everything costs more than we initially think it's going to cost.
Okay, so where you can find Niraj, Jessica, and the team is on their website, mindunlocked.co, on Instagram, mind.unlocked, and Niraj, where else for your social media handles?
Yeah, and the best place is probably I have a personal website which is Niraj5HAH, all one word, so it's like Niraj Shah but with a 5 for the first S. And my social handles are also Niraj5HAH on Instagram, on Twitter, on LinkedIn.
So I would like to say a huge thank you to Niraj. It has been such a treat. I feel so at home, even with, chatting with you, even though you are the other side of London to where I am. So I'd just like to say a huge thank you for sharing some absolute gems. And I feel that I could have talked to you for the rest of the afternoon. But lucky for you, Chris is on the time clock, and that is not a player.
I guess if you decide to do some long form episodes one day, we could do that, or we can do something like this again. But I just want to say,
yeah, we can do something.
Thank you so much for having me on a show. I really appreciate it. It's always a privilege to be asked. So thank you.
That is a pleasure. So the book that I'm going to recommend for this show is by a lady called Kimberley Parsons. She's a naturopath.
She's my friend.
Oh, there you go. So she is lovely. And I met her.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So I met her through Oliver Chittenden of Head Talks, who was a guest, and I went to one of his events. And so her book is the book I'm recommending for the show, The Yoga Kitchen. And she kindly shared her recipe for broccoli sushi with us, and that is on the blog of hopeandpatience.co.uk. But she's just fab. So yeah, naturopath, chef, and author, and she will be a guest on the show at some stage soon, I hope. And the quote is "To begin, begin" by William Wordsworth. So thank you so much for joining us both today. I'll be back with another story soon, so make sure you subscribe to get the latest episode. And if you like what you hear, I would so love it if you could review, subscribe, and importantly, spread the word. Until then, keep your sparkle.
Hope and Patience with Amelia Rope. Join the conversation at hopeandpatience.co.uk or find Amelia on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter @Hope and Pat.